I saw my cheating wife at a romantic dinner with the neighbor. The scene unfolded like a slow, painful stab, every detail digging into me like a sharp blade. They laughed, exchanged complicit glances, and touched hands on the table as if they were the only ones in the world. It was ironic. I, the faithful husband who always believed in the purity of marriage, was there, hidden in the shadows of the restaurant, watching everything fall apart before my eyes. She didn't know I was watching her, and her laugh, so light and carefree, made me feel like a complete idiot. As she smiled at him, I tried to understand when our love turned into this. I wanted to scream, interrupt dinner, make a scene. Part of me wanted to walk across that crowded room and pull her out, but another part, perhaps the most hurt, preferred to watch in silence. It would be easier to assimilate the betrayal if I saw it completely, without doubts, without room for excuses or lies. The pain was unbearable, a tightness in my chest that grew every time her fingers brushed his, and yet I lay there, helpless. She looked up and saw me. Her expression changed in an instant, her smile disappeared, her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to have stopped breathing. She knew she had been caught. I saw despair cross her face, a mix of guilt and fear. "Why are you here?" she murmured, as if she couldn't believe I was there, witnessing the blatant lie she had turned our lives into. "I'm here to see how far you can take this farce," I replied, my voice thick with bitterness. She tried to justify herself, mumbling apologies and explanations that sounded like poorly rehearsed lies. But I didn't want to hear it. No more. I had already decided, I was going to divorce her. She just didn't know it yet. But as she stammered out apologies, trying to find some way to explain the unexplainable, I glanced at the man sitting across the table. The neighbor who had always been so helpful, always ready to help with anything, from broken equipment to a ride to work. He held my gaze for a moment and, for some reason, I saw a faint smile appear on his lips. It was not a smile of triumph, but of defiance. As if he was telling me, without words, that he knew something I didn't know. At that moment, I realized that it wasn't just my wife who had something to hide. There was something deeper, darker going on. A game that I didn't fully understand, but that clearly cast me as the fool in the story. And suddenly, I didn't just want to get divorced. I wanted to understand what was happening behind that betrayal. And so, instead of leaving and letting them finish dinner in peace, I decided to approach them. I approached the table and watched her expression change to absolute panic. She got up, trying to drag me out of there. "We can talk about this at home," she said, her voice pleading. But I stayed. I wanted to hear what he had to say. "Why don't we tell the truth right here?" I asked, looking directly at him. "What's the story you guys came up with to justify this?" She started crying, begging for understanding, but I cut her off. "Stop. I don't want to hear any more lies." My head was spinning, and her every word seemed to echo like an insult. "Don't you think that's enough?" And it was then that he, the neighbor, finally spoke. "Maybe it's time for you to accept that you weren't enough for her," he said, with a calm that almost made me lose control. Every word seemed calculated to hurt, as if he had practiced it several times in his head before saying it out loud. She needed something you couldn't give. That was the last straw. A mixture of anger and disbelief coursed through me. "What do you know about what I can and cannot give?" I spat, voice firm. "You think you can just walk into my life, steal my wife and get away with it? You think you can do that without suffering the consequences?" He kept that enigmatic smile, and that's when I realized, he wasn't just a casual lover. He had some kind of control, something she didn't tell me. Something that made him feel confident to say all that, there, in my face, without fear. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just a simple betrayal. There was something more, something that was hidden behind that teasing smile and her desperate apology. My mind started to put the pieces together. Her frequent departures in recent weeks, the secret phone calls, the lame excuses. There was something I wasn't seeing, a missing piece of the puzzle, and I was determined to find out. I looked at her one last time and saw the guilt, the shame and the fear. But I also saw something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A secret that she carried and that seemed ready to explode at any moment. I walked away, leaving them there, as I felt my heart harden. This story would not end like this, with a simple exit from the scene. If there was anything I learned in that moment, it's that betrayal wasn't limited to what happened at that restaurant table. It was something bigger, something that involved deep lies, manipulation, and maybe even a conspiracy that I didn't yet understand. And that's what made me decide at that moment that I wasn't going to leave without answers. If they were playing, then I would too. And I had an ace up my sleeve that they didn't yet know about. When she tried to follow me out, trying once again to beg me for a chance to explain, I turned to her and whispered, in a way only she could hear, "Tell him to be careful. I'm not done with him yet, that." Her gaze filled with panic, and she rushed back to the table, looking at him with an urgency that made me even more curious. I knew that somehow this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much darker than I imagined. And now, I needed to know what was really going on. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they clearly show how betrayal can destroy lives, relationships and hearts. Get ready, because today's story is shocking, intense and will stir your emotions. So take a breather, settle in, and prepare for a narrative you won't soon forget. Good story. The clock was almost 6 in the afternoon when Richard closed the office door and walked to the elevator, carrying a folder of documents that he had promised to review over the weekend. It was a typical Friday, and the city seemed immersed in its usual frenetic routine. But for Richard, that late afternoon had a special meaning. He was preparing for another night with Olivia, his wife of 10 years. Their relationship had begun intensely, an overwhelming love that, at first, seemed unshakable. Over the years, this feeling transformed into something more serene, a silent complicity that he believed was the essence of a lasting marriage. As he drove home, Richard thought about the dinner he had planned for that night. A sophisticated restaurant that they used to frequent in the first years of their marriage, but which, due to the rush of everyday life, they had left aside. He remembered the nights they would sit on that candlelit porch, laughing and making plans for the future, still immersed in the glow of newfound love. That time seemed so distant now, almost like a memory from another life. But Richard was determined to rekindle that flame. He felt that in the last few months something had changed, a subtle distance that he couldn't identify, but that hovered over them. And that was what he wanted to resolve that night, a simple gesture that he hoped would bring Olivia back closer to him. Olivia was a charming woman, with a presence that filled any room. She had a way of speaking that put people at ease, as if her every word was filled with care and attention. It was hard not to like her. Her friends described her as warm, always ready to help, and Richard knew that these were some of the qualities that had attracted him most in the beginning. But recently he noticed an air of uneasiness about her. Olivia went out more, came back late, and sometimes seemed distracted, like she was somewhere else even when they were together. He tried not to worry, telling himself that she was just busy with her own things. Still, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore this new reality. Richard parked the car and stayed in the seat for a few seconds, breathing deeply. He remembered how, a few weeks ago, she had mentioned that she wanted to take an art course. She has always had a creative soul, but the demands of work and home life seemed to have stifled that side of her. He thought that perhaps this was a reflection of the new phase they were living, where they were both trying to find pieces of themselves that had been lost over time. It was easy to let things slide without realizing it, and Richard realized that perhaps he had neglected some of these needs himself. Upon entering the house, he was greeted by a welcoming silence. Olivia hadn't arrived yet, and he began preparing for dinner. He opened a bottle of red wine, arranged the table carefully, placing candles like old times. He wanted to create a special atmosphere, something that reminded them why they fell in love, what kept them together, even in the face of the ups and downs that every relationship faces. But as he did so, he couldn't help but remember the messages he'd found on Olivia's cell phone a few nights ago, seemingly trivial exchanges that had sparked slight concern. "I'm just exaggerating," he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the negative thoughts. "We just need more time together, that's all." The hours passed and Olivia finally arrived, a little late, which he already expected. Dressed elegantly, she entered the room and smiled when she saw the scene he had prepared. For a moment, it seemed like all of Richard's efforts had paid off. Her smile was sincere, and he could see a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a while. They talked about trivial things, avoiding any heavy topics like work or the worries Richard kept bottled up. They talked about films they wanted to see, places they wanted to travel to, almost as if they were rediscovering each other at that table. But even on that night, which seemed perfect, there was an air of tension in the air. Olivia was laughing and talking and looking engaged, but there was something in her eyes that Richard couldn't decipher. A hidden uneasiness, a trace of concern that he caught a glimpse of when she looked away or answered his questions with a little hesitation. He wanted to ask, he wanted to know what was going on in her head, but he thought it best not to ruin the moment. "It will pass," he thought, "it's just a phase." As they walked home after dinner, Richard had a feeling that something was about to change. He couldn't explain why, but it was as if that moment of calm was just preparation for something bigger, something he couldn't control. When they parked, Olivia suggested they take a walk around the block before going in, and he agreed. They walked side by side, talking about old memories, laughing at inside jokes, and for a brief moment, Richard felt like everything could go back to the way it was before. But that feeling of uncertainty still lingered, a feeling he couldn't ignore. Back at the house, Olivia went up to her bedroom while Richard remained in the living room, looking at the almost empty bottle of wine. He loved her, he had no doubt about it. But for the first time, he wondered if love was enough. If it would be enough to keep them together, to overcome whatever was coming between them. Memories of that night came back to him, and he remembered advice a friend had given him years ago: love is made of trust, and without it, it doesn't matter how much you love someone. That sentence now seemed to have a different weight, as if each word was loaded with a truth that he was about to discover. Olivia, on the other hand, was looking at herself in the bedroom mirror, adjusting the earrings she had taken off before going to bed. The reflection showed a woman who seemed confident, but she knew that inside, her emotions were conflicted. She wanted to maintain that life she had built, the comfort of being by Richard's side, who had always been her safe haven. But there was something more, something pulling her in another direction that she couldn't ignore. Every night that she returned home, the weight of that choice became more difficult to bear, and she wondered how long she would be able to maintain this facade. The two were there, living the same routine, sleeping in the same bed, but somehow, far apart. While Richard tried to restore the closeness he felt he was losing, Olivia struggled with the fear that the secret she kept would end up destroying everything. She knew she needed to decide, but the more time passed, the harder it seemed to make a decision. And, at that moment, both still believed they had control over their destinies, without imagining that they were on the brink of a storm that would change their lives forever. In the days following the dinner, Richard tried to maintain the optimism he felt that night. He clung to the moments of lightness they had, trying to believe that this was the beginning of a new phase, a phase of reconciliation, where their love would finally overcome any obstacle. Olivia seemed to have given herself to that effort too, appearing more present and affectionate, like in the old days. She laughed at Richard's jokes, rested her head on his shoulder while they watched television, and even offered to cook dinner on some nights, something he hadn't seen happen in months. All of this gave Richard the impression that perhaps his concerns were nothing more than exaggeration. But as Richard tried to find comfort in the restored routine, he couldn't help but notice small changes in Olivia's behavior. She seemed distant at random moments, as if she were trapped in thoughts that were taking her away from there. He woke up early, went for a walk before the sun rose, and occasionally left the room to take calls that lasted longer than he considered normal. When he asked, she quickly replied that they were work matters, as if any further explanation was unnecessary. One night, while Olivia was in the shower, her cell phone vibrated on the table. Richard looked at the screen, seeing only an unknown number. He wasn't usually the spying type, but that uneasy feeling was still there, eating away at him inside. He hesitated, but curiosity got the better of him, and he unlocked the screen to see the message. "Still thinking about you since last time. See you tomorrow." Richard's heart skipped a beat. The message was ambiguous, but it still carried a weight that he felt immediately. He knew he shouldn't create hasty theories, but the feeling that something was out of place only increased. That night he couldn't sleep. Olivia looked calm next to him, her breathing light and deep, as if she were at peace. But for Richard, every waking second was an incessant drumming of doubts and distrust. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself that maybe it was just someone from work, maybe something harmless. But the uncertainty was unbearable, and he knew he needed answers. The next day, Richard decided to follow Olivia after she left the house early for one of her walks. He watched her get into her car, drive down streets he knew well, and eventually stop at a cafe on the other side of town. From inside the car, he saw Olivia enter and, a few minutes later, he watched a man approach the cafe's entrance and enter as well. Richard felt his stomach turn, a mixture of fear and anger. He recognized the man immediately. It was the neighbor, Alex, who was always friendly and helpful, someone he would never imagine being involved with Olivia in any way other than as a close friend. For a few minutes, he was paralyzed, trying to process what he saw. Alex and Olivia were sitting close together, chatting animatedly, laughing, and to anyone who saw them, they could just be good friends. But there was something in the way they looked at each other, something intimate and complicit, that Richard couldn't ignore. He watched as their hands touched briefly on the table, a gesture that seemed accidental but that, to him, spoke more than anything they could say. Richard walked away before they saw him. His mind was racing through all the possibilities and justifications he wanted to find to explain what was happening. He wanted to believe there was still a simple explanation, one that didn't involve betrayal. But the truth seemed too clear to ignore, and what he saw in that cafe only reinforced the feeling that their relationship hadn't been the same for a long time. However, he needed proof. Something concrete, that would clear all your doubts and help you understand exactly what was happening. He spent the rest of the day thinking about how to approach Olivia, or even if he should approach her at all. But the fear of confirming his worst suspicions made him hesitate. Maybe if he waited a little longer, he could catch Olivia in a moment of weakness where she finally admitted what was happening. The opportunity came 2 nights later. Olivia said she was going out on a date with a friend she hadn't seen in a while, and Richard did what he always did, pretended to believe it. But instead of staying at home, he decided to follow her again, this time without any hesitation. He followed her to an elegant restaurant, where she entered and took a seat at a table. It didn't take long for Alex to arrive, wearing a casual shirt, as if this were a special night for him too. Richard watched everything from afar, hidden by the shadows of the parking lot. As they sat down and ordered, Richard noticed how Alex leaned closer to Olivia, how he touched her arm as they spoke, with a naturalness that only those who are romantically involved can do. And then, it happened. Olivia laughed at something Alex said and, in a moment of relaxation, she kissed him. It was a brief kiss, but full of meaning. Richard felt the world shatter around him. There were no more doubts. He didn't need anything else to know he was being betrayed. Richard stepped back, his mind filled with anger, sadness and confusion. He went back to the car and sat there, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. The betrayal, which until then was only a suspicion, was now clear and cruel before his eyes. He could almost hear himself breathing as he tried to understand what he was going to do next. Olivia was no longer the woman he had married, and the future he had imagined for them was crumbling there, in front of that restaurant. But as the anger boiled inside him, something changed. He didn't just want to confront them, he wanted to understand, discover what else was hidden behind that betrayal. Because, for Richard, something still didn't make sense. Richard spent the next few days in a kind of fog, where anger and sadness mixed together in a confusing whirlwind. The vision of Olivia kissing Alex wouldn't leave his mind, and he knew he needed to act, he needed to confront them once and for all. During the dinner where he saw the betrayal happen, he didn't have the strength to confront the two at the moment. Instead, he went home and spent hours thinking about how he could approach the situation in a way that would reveal the whole truth, not just the betrayal, but everything he felt was hidden. Something about this relationship between Olivia and Alex felt bigger than just an affair, and Richard didn't want to just scream and demand answers, he wanted to expose everything. That same week, he decided he wouldn't wait any longer. He invited Olivia to dinner at home, something he never did on weekdays, and she accepted without suspecting anything. Richard knew that this would be the night that everything changed. He prepared the table, as he had done other times, but this time it wasn't to rekindle the marriage flame, it was to put all the cards on the table. When Olivia arrived, she noticed something was different. He was serious, his eyes fixed, and she tried to break the ice with a hesitant smile. "I'm glad you were able to make dinner like this, in the middle of the week," she said, trying to sound casual as she sat down. Richard didn't respond immediately. He poured wine for them both, sat down and looked straight into her eyes. "Olivia, I need to talk about what's been going on between us," he began, and her light expression instantly fell. She knew what was coming, but she had no idea how far it would go. "Richard. She began, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "I saw you, Olivia. I saw you with Alex, at the restaurant. There's no need to deny it." The color drained from her face, and for a moment, it looked like she was going to fall apart. Her eyes filled with tears, and she covered her mouth with her hand, as if that would stifle the truth. I can explain." She stammered, the words coming out in a rushed and desperate way. "Then explain," Richard replied, his voice low but carrying an intensity that cut like a blade. "Explain to me why the woman I've been married to for 10 years is having an affair with our neighbor." Olivia began to cry, tears falling freely down her face as she tried to find the words. "Richard, please, I didn't want this to happen. It wasn't intentional. I was confused, I felt alone." "So you decided the solution to this was to get involved with Alex? Does that make sense to you, Olivia?" His voice was filled with a bitterness she had never heard before. He was calm, almost cold, and that terrified her more than if he had screamed. "It was a mistake," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I know it was, but I didn't know how to get out of it. He was getting closer, and before I knew it, I was already involved." Richard leaned forward, fixing his gaze on her. "What didn't you realize, Olivia? Didn't you realize that you were destroying everything we've built? That you were betraying the trust of someone who had always been there for you?" He paused, waiting for a response that didn't come. "But it's not just that, is it? I saw the way he looked at you. This isn't just an affair. There's something else going on between you two, and I'm going to find out what it is." Olivia fell silent, her hands shaking as she tried to come up with a response that didn't sound like yet another empty excuse. She knew Richard was right, it wasn't just a passing fling. And that's why every word he said cut deep, because it was the truth she had been trying to hide even from herself. "Richard, you don't understand. It's not just about what happened between me and Alex. He has something against me. Something I can't just ignore," she said, finally letting out a piece of secret she held so deeply. Richard frowned, confused. "What does he have against you?" Olivia hesitated for a long moment, before looking away. "He knows something that could destroy our family. And he used it to manipulate me." Richard's heart skipped a beat. He didn't expect to hear that. For a moment, he thought it was all simple, she had been unfaithful, and he needed to decide how to deal with it. But now, a new element entered the story, something he didn't fully understand, and this only increased his anger. "What does he know, Olivia? What are you hiding from me?" She bit her lip, tears still flowing. "It's complicated, Richard. It's not something I can explain like that, all at once." "I don't care how complicated it is," he snapped, voice rising. "I deserve to know the truth. There is nothing you can say that will justify this betrayal, but I want to know what else you hide. Because if this secret is so big that it makes you betray everything we have, then I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Olivia lowered her head, her shoulders shaking as she tried to find the courage to speak. "A few months ago, Alex started hinting that he knew something about me, something I wanted to keep buried," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Years ago, before we got married, I made a mistake that I thought would never come back to haunt me." Richard was silent, waiting for her to continue. He could feel they were getting closer to the truth, and whatever it was, he knew it would change everything. "I had a complicated relationship before you. And there was a situation that ended, very badly. Alex found out about it, I don't know how, but he knew. He used it to blackmail me, to keep me under control, and I gave in. I gave in because I was scared. Because I thought if he revealed what he knew, everything we had would fall apart." Richard felt a shiver run through his body. He wanted to explode, to scream that nothing justified what she had done, but something was stopping him. Something about the tone of her voice, the way she spoke, as if she were finally breaking free from an invisible prison. "What exactly does he know, Olivia?" he asked, each word pronounced carefully. She lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy, but still staring at Richard with painful sincerity. "He knows that before we got married, I was involved in an illegal scheme. It was a mistake that haunted me for years. I thought I was free of it, but Alex found a way to trap me again. And he used it against me." Richard blinked, the revelation taking shape in his mind. He tried to put the pieces together, understand what it meant, but the questions were too many. "Are you telling me this whole betrayal was because of something that happened before we met? Something you never told me?" Olivia nodded slowly. "I know I should have told you, but I was scared. I thought if you knew, you would leave me. And then Alex showed up, with this information, and I didn't know what to do." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Everything he thought he knew about what was happening seemed wrong now, and the naked truth was more devastating than he could have imagined. He finally understood that the betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the secret Olivia had been keeping was a ticking time bomb that threatened to destroy everything they had built. But as he tried to process everything, one thing became clear to Richard: he could no longer ignore what was happening. If Alex really had that kind of control over Olivia, he needed to find out exactly what was at stake, and he needed to do it quickly. Because now, more than ever, he felt like there was a part of the story that hadn't yet been told, and he was determined to find out what it was. The revelation left Richard in shock. He got up from the table, pacing the room as if he needed to process everything in motion. His mind raced, trying to put the pieces together, trying to understand how the woman he had known for so many years had kept such a devastating secret for so long. The anger and pain of betrayal were still there, burning inside him, but now they were mixed with a new sensation: bewilderment. How could she hide something so serious? And how had Alex become the manipulator she described, using Olivia's past to control her and force her into something she clearly didn't want? Olivia continued to sit, watching Richard, her eyes still teary. She didn't know what to say, nor how to remedy what she had just confessed. For the first time, she looked truly vulnerable, as if all her defenses had crumbled at once. The silence between them was heavy, almost palpable, and Richard felt that any word he said now would carry immense weight. He knew that the choice he was about to make could define not only their future as a couple, but also how he would deal with what was yet to come. "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" he finally asked, voice lower but still filled with a pain he couldn't hide. "I could have helped you. I could have found a way to resolve this without it coming to this. Olivia sighed, and her expression was one of pure defeat. I was scared, Richard. Scared that if you knew, everything we had would be gone. I thought I could handle this alone, that I could keep this part of my past buried and move on. But I was wrong. Alex found out and used it against me, and I didn't know how to escape. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, trying to find clarity amid the emotional chaos he felt. He had always imagined the truth to be something simple, binary, but now everything seemed like a tangled web of lies, fears, and manipulations. When he opened his eyes, he felt more tired than ever, as if he were carrying a weight he didn't know if he could bear. But he needed to understand. I needed to know what was really at stake, and why Alex thought he had the power to manipulate Olivia like that. So you just gave in? He asked, not hiding the bitterness in his voice. Did you think it was better to let him control you than to trust me? Than to try to find a solution together? Olivia nodded, embarrassment clearly visible on her face. I know there's no excuse for what I did. I let fear control me, and I was weak. But I never wanted to hurt you, Richard. I just wanted to protect what we had. Her words sounded sincere, but for Richard, they weren't enough. He walked over and bent down, bringing her to her height. Protect what we had? You destroyed everything. And because of who? From a man who never meant anything to you, who was only using you for his own ends. Olivia didn't respond right away. She just looked at him, tears falling silently, as if she was accepting that there was no going back. I know this doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not being honest with you. I'm sorry for allowing Alex to do this to me. I just wish everything was different. Richard walked away, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. He wanted to scream, he wanted to make her feel the pain he felt, but at the same time, there was something about the way she spoke that kept him from completely losing control. He could see the weight of regret in her, and it disarmed him in a way he hadn't expected. And now? What are you going to do? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Are you going to let him continue manipulating you? Are you going to let him use this to end our lives? Olivia shook her head slowly. I don't know, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I thought of so many ways to solve this, but none of them seem to work. He always finds a way to be one step ahead. It's like he knows exactly where to hit me to keep me trapped. Richard was silent, taking it all in. He knew that no matter how angry he felt, he couldn't just ignore the fact that Alex was using Olivia's fear to control the situation. He couldn't let this continue, and more than anything, he needed to find a way to turn the tide. You're going to have to tell me everything, Olivia. Every detail. If I'm going to face this, I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. She hesitated for a moment, but then began to speak. She told him about the scheme she got involved in years ago, something she had done out of desperation, trying to get out of a difficult financial situation before meeting Richard. It was something she had gotten over, or at least she thought she had, until Alex showed up with documents proving her involvement and threatened to expose her unless she did what he wanted. He used it to keep Olivia close, to satisfy an unhealthy desire for power and control, knowing that she wouldn't have the courage to tell Richard the truth for fear of losing everything. He blackmailed me, she said, the words falling like a weight lifted from her shoulders. He said if I didn't do what he wanted, he would go to the police. And I didn't know what to do, Richard. I was terrified. Richard felt a deep anger well up inside him, not just at Olivia, but at what Alex had done. So he thinks he can just play with your life, and mine, and get away with it. He thinks he can manipulate you and use it to destroy us. Olivia didn't respond, but Richard saw the fear in her eyes. She was terrified, and he could feel that, despite everything, she was still a victim in this cruel game. And it was at that moment that he decided he wouldn't let Alex emerge victorious. He knew he needed to act, he needed to confront his neighbor and find out exactly what his plan was, but, above all, he needed to find a way to free Olivia from this nightmare she had lived in silence for so long. "This ends now," he said, with a determination she had never seen before. "I'm not going to let him destroy anything anymore. I'm going to talk to Alex, and I'm going to end this once and for all." Olivia tried to protest, but Richard had already made up his mind. He knew there was a risk, that he could be getting into something bigger than he imagined, but he no longer had a choice. He couldn't live in uncertainty any longer, he couldn't let Alex continue to manipulate their lives. And as Olivia watched Richard walk out the door, she realized that their future depended on this confrontation. And that, somehow, whatever happened next would be what would define not only the fate of their marriage, but also the entire truth she had hidden for so many years. Richard drove without thinking, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could confront Alex and end the situation. He knew he needed to be careful, that he couldn't let anger and indignation cloud his judgment. But I also knew I couldn't hesitate. Alex had kept Olivia under control for too long, and Richard felt the only way to free her, and finally have some peace, was to confront him directly and force him to stop his foul play. When he arrived at Alex's house, there were no more doubts in his mind. He got out of the car and headed straight for the door, knocking loudly, adrenaline pumping with every movement. Alex opened the door with a smug smile, as if he already knew what was about to happen. Richard noticed the look of contempt on his face, and it only made his determination grow. "Ah, Richard, what a surprise," said Alex, with a sarcastic tone. "What can I do for you at this time of night?" Richard took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "You know very well why I am here. We both know what you've been doing. And it's over. I want you to stop manipulating Olivia and get out of our lives." Alex laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. "Do you think you can just come here and order me around, Richard? It's not just about Olivia. I have control, and I'm not going to give that up just because you came here to make a scene." "Control?" Richard stepped forward, challenging Alex. "All you have is pathetic blackmail. You are using her fear to feel powerful. But I'm not Olivia, and you won't manipulate me." Alex crossed his arms, still confident, but there was a different gleam in his eyes now. "And what do you intend to do? If I want, I can destroy everything with a single call. Do you have any idea what would happen if I revealed what I know? Her life would be over. And from the way you're here, angry and in love, I bet you don't want that to happen." Richard stared at him, his heart racing, and then something inside him changed. He realized that the only way to beat Alex was to turn the tables, expose his true face, show that fear no longer had control there. "Maybe you should think twice before you do that, Alex," he said, his voice now calm and cold. "Because if you try to ruin her life, I will make sure everyone knows who you really are. I will make sure everyone knows that you are a blackmailer, that you used a person's past to force them to do what you wanted. Who thinks they're going to get away with this?" Alex blinked, surprised for the first time. He didn't expect that turn of events. Richard had changed his tone, and it suddenly seemed like he had control of the situation. Alex tried to fight back, still with the cynical smile. "You are bluffing. There's no way to prove anything. Are you sure about this?" Richard half smiled, feeling that for the first time he was one step ahead. "Because I have a recording of Olivia admitting everything. Admitting what you did, admitting how you manipulated her. And I would have no problem using that against you. Do you want to risk it, Alex?" Alex's smile faltered, and he finally fell silent. Richard could see the doubt forming, and knew he had found his weakness. "Why are you so interested in keeping this? Do you really think you would get away with it if I handed this over to the police? If I took this recording to your wife, to your coworkers? I think you would be the one with the most to lose." For a moment, Alex seemed to fall apart. He knew he could no longer hide behind the threats, and for the first time, Richard saw the fear in his eyes. A fear that revealed that he knew he had lost. Alex slumped his shoulders, as if carrying a weight that had finally become unbearable. What do you want? He muttered, without any more arrogance. I want you to disappear. Stop showing up, stop calling Olivia, stop thinking you can control her. Because if I find out that you got close to her again, that you did anything to harm our lives, I will destroy you. And this time, I will not hesitate. Alex looked at Richard, and there was something in his eyes that looked like a mixture of hatred and resignation. He knew he had lost, knew Richard was no longer willing to play by his rules. Okay, he said finally, his voice weak. I'm going to get out of your lives. But I hope you know that doesn't erase what she did. She still lied to you. She still cheated on you. Richard took a step back, considering Alex's words. He knew that was true. He knew that Olivia had still betrayed his trust, and that this was something he would have to face, one way or another. But for now, he had achieved something bigger. He had taken Olivia out of Alex's control. And because of that, he felt a kind of relief, a sense that he could finally deal with the truth without someone else's lies and manipulations interfering. He turned and left, leaving Alex alone. On the way back home, his mind was full of confusing and contradictory thoughts. He knew that, despite having won that confrontation, the real battle was far from over. He still needed to face Olivia, still needed to decide what to do about their marriage. But there was something freeing about knowing that he had control now, that the decisions he made would be entirely his own. When he got home, he found Olivia waiting for him, clearly anxious. She saw the look on Richard's face and knew he had gone to Alex. What did you do? She asked, her voice low and fearful. I did what I had to do, he replied. Alex won't torment you anymore. He promised he will disappear. Olivia looked relieved, but also confused. How did you get that? Richard sighed. I showed him that he no longer had power. That the fear he used to control you would no longer work. But now, Olivia, we need to be honest with each other. I need to know if there's anything else. And I need to know if you are willing to face the consequences of what happened. Because for both of us, this will only work if there is truth. She nodded, and in that moment, Richard saw something different in her. He saw the determination, the desire to do the right thing. They still had a lot to resolve, but they knew they could start from there, with sincerity. For the first time in a long time, he felt like there could be a future. Not the perfect future he had imagined years ago, but a new one, built with the imperfections they both now needed to accept. Thanks for listening until the end. What did you think of this story? Comment your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting and impactful stories like this. And remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Betrayal only brings pain and destruction, and these stories are proof of that. Until next time.